Hello, everyone. This is Dave Landry, and this is Trading Simplified, episode 44. Wow, can you believe it? So, what are we talk about? Well, I want to continue along with the methodology in action. I think it's crucial, especially now since things are really working out well, and there's a couple things that aren't working too, and that's important to also show you. So, I want to continue along those lines, and you have to realize that everything works better with trend, and right now we've got a trend, and it's a golden opportunity. I want to continue my discussion on Darvas, but I just want to kind of touch upon a little bit of his breakout methodology and talk a little bit about breakouts, especially as they apply to IPOs. And then I also want to get into ACP plus crypto, which is a winning combination. And I'll flesh that out in a lot more details. I want to follow up on some mystery charts and some pitch stocks, which are all part of the methodology in action. And then housekeeping. I do take requests. As I've been saying lately, I'm way backed up. But what I have been doing is covering things in the weekend charts. So if you go to daveleonard.com on Thursdays, you should be able to register for the show. Lately, I've been doing them Thursday nights at 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Central. If you do need to contact me, daveleonard.com/contact. If you want the slides from this presentation, all the other presentations, plus a page I'm working on where I have everything consolidated, so you can go in and say, okay, Dave talked about TKOs. Oh, there they are, episode 2 or 3 or whatever it was, and so on and so forth. So I'm working on that, and that's all included with if you put your information in at the Stockcharts link that you see there, daveleonard.com/Stockcharts. I'll also give you all 3 of my books so you can read about the methodology and understand where I'm coming from. All right, I want to follow up on some mystery charts, and I also want to talk about the methodology in action. So here's our mystery chart for this week. It's an IPO, obviously. I actually already played this stock, took half profits, and then got stopped out on the remainder, just for what it's worth. And I'll show you some of these breakout positions in just 1 second and how to play the IPOs. So we've got an entry, it's the first one on the list, 28.75, a stop at 24.50, IPT of 33, so we're risking 4.25 points. And that sounds like a lot, but that's what this particular stock calls for. So we got a nice trend as evidenced by the big blue arrow, which I like to draw. We have a TKO, again, I think that was like show 2 or 3, but if you go to that link, which I'll provide for you, you'll be able to see the TKO show. Plus, we talk about it quite often. And in this case, because it's such a wide range bar, I think it's going to be worth trading on more of a textbook type of fashion. Now, a textbook type of fashion with a TKO means that you have a nice wide range bar down, a knockout bar, big enough to likely have knocked out some players. And by the way, if you are a player, a trend player, and you get knocked out, then maybe it's big enough. And I got knocked out in this particular position, but I think it's worth going back to the well. So entry is up here above the TKO bar. Stop is to go down here. If you back up in the slides, once you get them, you'll see that the entry minus a protective stop plus the entry is going to equal the initial profit target. And I'll show you those in a few charts coming up. And then, of course, if you can't sleep at night, you can always go in and watch the show I did on money management. Mystery chart follow-up. So we talked about this one a few weeks ago. FUV, as you can see, big blue arrow points higher here. This is the ACP plugin, which, again, is free to everyone who likes this video. If you're watching it on YouTube, once you fire up ACP, provided you like this video, there'll be a little plugin down here somewhere. Click on that and then click on my plugin, and within seconds, it'll be installed. And it's absolutely free. So it pulls back a little bit, and you can see here the Landry light, which is just simply the lows greater than the moving average in this case. And lately, I've been using the 30-day EMA, which has been working out really great. And in fact, with cryptos, it's just been fantastic. And I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. And I still think there's an opportunity there. But before we get all that, as you can see, it did pull back to the moving average. So the count, you can see, was up here about 70-something, goes back to 0. This just counts the number of days. So back here, you'd have 1 day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you could also set these parameters here. Normally I keep them set to about 10 as far as the range, because after 10 days, I feel like that's a pretty good number for a market that's either trending or beginning to trend. So entry was here, the stop was down here, and the initial profit target was up here. So let's see what's happened so far. At first it was off to the races, but unfortunately it's come back in. So what do? Should we get out? Dave, you're a trend trader, it's going sideways. No, we're going to honor our stop just in case, and we're going to let it all shake out. Years ago, I would get out after so many days of not being profitable in a position, and I found myself missing a lot of big winners. And if you're a trend trader, trading a methodology similar to mine, pullback in nature usually, IPOs, I do some breakout things, a few areas such as IPOs, I do some breakout things. But for the most part, we're trading pullbacks, and you're trying to capture these big old fat trends. And if you get out at the first sign of adversity, or if you just don't wait to, if you don't let your stop take you out as opposed to just getting out early, you're going to miss the occasional big trend. And that big trend is important. And I'll show you one or two in this presentation. BCLI so far has failed somewhat miserably. But hey, I like to show you the good and the bad. Of course, I'd rather show you the good, but I want to show you that doesn't always work. But I'm not giving up just yet on this one. There you can see the parameters, entry, protective stop, and then IPT for a risk of 340. Nice big blue arrow is pointing higher. You can see down here the Landry light count was up above 40 or so nice longer term trend. Nice little pullback, and you can see the Landry light goes back to 0. So one thing cool about this, as I often say, I'm not a huge fan of indicators, but they can illustrate what's happening. So if you look down here and see lots of green, you look up here, you say, wow, I see it. It's actually going higher. It helps to show you how strong that trend is. And the other thing that I think would be pretty cool to do, and I keep threatening to talk to the people over Stockcharts, I think I might have mentioned it to Grayson in passing, but maybe see if someone over there can write us some scans that would help us to find these setups, and that would be super awesome. But you can see it pulls back to the moving average. Actually has 1 day of negative daylight, or Landry light as I now call it. But so far it looks pretty darn good as a pullback. So here's our entry. Our protective stop is down here, and initial profit target is up here. So let's see what happened. It triggers, and unfortunately it comes right back in. And sometimes it happens, spelled with a silent SH, you just get triggered in. If only your trigger were just a tiny bit higher, you would not have gotten into trouble. But I'm not going to get too excited just yet. Yeah, if it stops out, I'll drop an F-bomb, admittedly. But so far, maybe it just needs a little time to consolidate its gains before it takes off again. Now, if you watched the pitch a couple of weeks ago, one of the stocks I recommended was RXT, Rackspace. And what I did, practicing what I preach, on the same day I mentioned it in the pitch, I said if it closes at a new closing high, I would be a buyer. And as you can see, I bought right around the close. And then fortunately, in this particular case, I was able to flip out the shares in right around 2 hours later for a pretty decent price for half of the shares. And I still have the other half on. So as you can see, it's taken off nicely, but then it's begun to pull back a little bit. And that's a first pullback in an IPO, and that's a great pattern of trade. So you can see here it is in the open portfolio. Notice that half is white and half is still highlighted. That's because half of the position has hit the initial profit target, like the Chewy trade, which we'll take a look at in a few minutes. APG, which also hit the initial profit target. And so, of course, RXT has hit that initial profit target. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You can see it triggers an entry, but doesn't do a whole lot for 2 or 3 days, almost 4 days. And so you might think, well, let's just get out of this. Well, look what happens. Sometimes the market, in fact, more often than not, does not move on your time frame. So we were able to sell half of those shares on Monday, and so far, so good, knock on wood. Now, lately I've been talking a lot about Nicholas Darvas, and I just got his third book, which does just a few pages into it. I literally got it last night. And it does help to flesh out some things. It looks like he kind of change the methodology just a little bit. But the gist of it is, if you have a high that's not touched for 3 days, in his words, then that's the top of the box. And if a low is not touched for 3 days, that forms the bottom of the box. Now, the reason I want to mention that is that breakouts work in markets that break out and tend to follow through. One of my criticisms of Darvas, or any breakout methodology for that matter, is that more often than not, breakouts fail. Or even Darvas said he expected to be wrong 50% of the time. But IPOs do have a breakout characteristic. Now, as I said earlier, and as you see in all of these shows, I'm a breakout player, but I will play breakouts and IPOs. So let's just take a look at this IPO vis-a-vis the Darvas setup. So what did he say? The top of the box is a high that's not touched for 3 days. So there you go right there. The Darvas buy would have been on this particular day. Now, in his first book, he said he'd put in a stop an eighth below the breakout point. And now, in his third book, I'm seeing that he said that he actually uses 10%. Or in the 70s when he wrote his third book, which clarifies some of the other stuff. So it's good to get it clarified because there's a lot of things that weren't quite. It's good that he's clarifying things because there were a lot of things that were in question in the first book. So I'm looking forward to get through that, and then we'll come back and revisit. We'll take a look at Darvas in present markets. So in this particular case, it would have made another box here, and your buy would have been as it peeped up above that box. Now, let me show you what I actually did in this particular trade. Now, what we're looking to do is buy on a 5-day closing high if the high is not set on day one. If the high is set on day one, we're also looking to buy above the day one high on a close. And I'll show you a couple of these. And if you go in and watch last week's Dave Landry's The Week in Charts, and the YouTube link on that for my YouTube channel is www.youtube.com/C as in custom /Dave Landry. And if you go to that link, if you would subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate it, and you'll get all these videos when I do the Week in Charts. But you can see 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day. The high was set on day 2 for the week, we now know. And as long as the high isn't set on day 1, so if you flip those bars 2 and 1, and that second bar was the first bar, and the high was up here, then we'd also have to close above the high if it was up here, okay? Watch the video from last week, and that'll make a lot of sense. So your closing high is here. We're going to look to buy on a close when it breaks above that closing high. And there you see right there, it broke above it. We don't buy as soon as it crosses above that because we had a trigger here, we could have a trigger here. We want to make sure we have good follow through on that close. And by the way, we will buy as early as day 5, but notice on day 5 it was not a new closing high. So here's my actual trades. I just grabbed out of one account so you can see that I did take the trade. And I flipped out 400 shares. So let me show you how that shook out. And you can see, as I showed you in the prior chart, it did come back in initially, but I stuck with the position because I wasn't stopped out. And so yesterday, which was Monday, August 31st, I was able to flip out half of the shares around the open. Now, here's another one. And by the way, that prior stock, we were talking about that in the Facebook group. Just to let you know that these aren't in perfect hindsight. And as I've said quite often, never say never. But my goal is to always show you something that I've talked about before, such as a couple of weeks ago, we talked about some stock in the pitch, and I've been following up on those. Stocks that I recommend directly in my trading service, and then stocks that we discuss in YouTube. So getting back to this stock, this is another IPO, day 1, day 2. The high was set on day 2. Now, we don't know that if that's going to be the high for the week, but all I care about is that it is greater than the day 1 high. Here's a day 3, and here's day 4, and here is day 5. So what's the highest closing high? Would be on day 3. And as you can see, here's some comments. We were talking about this IPO in the Facebook group. By the way, if you are a gold member of DaveLandry.com, I would encourage you to join the Facebook group. In fact, I'll actually bug you until you do. If you don't do Facebook, sign up as your dog and let me know who you are, and I'll let you in. But you do have to be a gold member, and that's to keep the riffraff out. But you can see day 3, new closing high for the IPO. So let's see how it shakes out. Notice we did probe that buy line, so to speak, okay? But I did not take the trade until it actually broke through and closed above that closing high. Now, I do have a rule, or a general guideline, that I should say, that if an IPO is more than $20 a share for this buy at B pattern, I also like the low to be greater than the 5-day simple moving average. Now, in this case, you'll say, hey, Dave, it's not greater than the moving average. There's no Landry light. Well, that's true, but the reason I have that rule is so that the stock appears to have some momentum. And in this particular case, because it made such a nice wide range bar higher, I figured it was worth a shot. Now, also, if you're familiar with the pattern, you can see that the range wasn't that huge on this IPO, but on this buy day, it was fairly wide. So that's one of those things that's a little tricky. It might be a little confusing because I often talk about an IPO needing a really, really good trading range before we take this buy at B pattern. But in this particular case, that trading range, so to speak, was completed on the same day that the buy signal triggered. And again, if you go in and watch the weekly charts presentations for the past several weeks, and you get those again on YouTube, you will see a lot of these trades and how they shook out, and I explain them in a lot more detail. So in this particular case, we sold half right about this area here. So far, so good on this one. And here are the actual trades. You can see 400 shares are being put on, and then 200 shares are being taken off at a pretty nice profit, about 5 points higher. So far, so good on that one. Now, getting back to the Darvas, this is a former mystery chart. So getting back to Darvas boxes, we put this on way back in May, and the buy was right on that particular day there. And as you can see, it sort of failed miserably for about the first week or so. Well, I didn't get out because I'm following the methodology, and the methodology says if you get stopped out, you get stopped out. So our Darvas box would look something like this. And by the way, the whole discussion on Darvas boxes came from a conversation I had about 6 weeks ago with a client, and he was asking me about Docu. And luckily, Docu did have a nice little TKO that stuck out pretty much like a sore thumb, and I did have it on my watch list for that particular day. But Docu, as I explained to the client, was sort of what I call a box stock vis-a-vis Nicholas Darvas, where it just tends to make boxes on top of boxes on top of boxes. And by the way, if you could figure out what stock would become a box stock ahead of time, you'd own the world. But my way to kind of hope, and I hate to use the word hope in this business, but my way to kind of hope that it turns into a box stock would be to follow my patterns, such as pullbacks and TKOs, and in the IPOs, obviously, some patterns that have a little bit more of a breakout characteristic, as opposed to trading the box method in and of itself. But anyway, you could see it did make another box a little bit higher than its prior box, but they did have some intersection of the boxes, but that's okay because we're not following the Darvas methodology completely. It's just kind of a cool way to illustrate that it's making the boxes on top of boxes. The other thing that the Darvas thing, by the way, has really helped me with is we took partial profits back here somewhere, and then this thing just kind of meandered and chopped back and forth. And just studying Darvas's mentality on everything, he just didn't worry about a stock if it bounced around once he was in, provided, of course, he wasn't stopped out. So that does kind of help me to remember that, hey, just sit tight and let things unfold and let that stop take you out when the time comes. Now, this was up about 8 points earlier. It's backed off a little bit, but so far so good. And I hate to use that word again, hope, but hopefully it'll go on to make another box higher. So ideally, you want these boxes to stack one on top the other like this and not overlap. But because we're using a fairly liberal stop and a fairly, even more fairly liberal trailing stop, even if they do overlap a little bit like this particular stock has, then it's no big deal because obviously you're not stopped out. Now, one thing I've been thinking about quite a bit, in addition to IPOs, in fact, I feel like last week at Bandcamp, but if you go and watch last week's Dave Landry's Week in Charts, I promise you it's worth your time. And if not, you'll get a good night's sleep, right? Borrowing a line from Greg Morris, just don't operate heavy machinery afterwards. But all kidding aside, I'm pretty excited about it. I know you probably want to party with me. But IPOs have been phenomenal. I just showed you 2 fantastic ones. There's been quite a few other ones lately, and they've just been really, really amazing. Crypto here and there could be fantastic, and I think it's still the next big thing. And it was also the last big thing, sans the slide in October. So I think crypto plus ACP, the ACP platform, is a winning combination. And the little asterisk there is, or any market that's trending. One thing that I preach over and over and over again is everything works better with trend. If you go back and watch some early shows when the market was trending really nicely, and I showed all those mystery charts, and week after week after week, they all worked out. You probably thought this guy was the smartest guy out there, right? Well, that was because the market was trending. Don't confuse brains with a bull market. I'd probably make a lot more money in my educational business if I bragged about how great this stuff is. Well, this stuff works when the market is trending and following through. And it works incredibly well when the market is trending and following through. When being the key word in that sentence. So let's take a look at some of these cryptos. Now, these cryptocurrencies markets are moving really fast. They're creating these new cryptocurrencies each day. And I don't even know if Link is an actual cryptocurrency or could be called that. And here's the thing. You don't have to understand what a market is as long as you understand trend. But you can see back here, market was kind of going mostly sideways. We did have some green, but then it came back to the moving average, and we had some green, and it came back to the moving average. But notice that it begun to take off. In fact, I did not know about this until about a week or so ago, and I'm long right now, FYI. Had I known about this back here at the end of July, I would have been all over this little pullback here. So let's take a look at the recent pullback in this one. You can see we've got nice Landry light, about 30 bars higher. And you can see the lows here are greater than the moving average. And of course, the big blue arrow points higher. And it didn't quite kiss the moving average, but that's okay. I'm not requiring everything to be exact. I am a discretionary trader. Right here, it kissed the moving average, kind of textbook in nature. If you were doing a scan for it, obviously that would have popped up on that particular day. But it came close enough, or it pulled back far enough. If I was looking at a blank chart, which I normally do, I would have felt like this was good enough to take a trade. And I did take the trade for what it's worth. But you can see we got a little pullback here, and really hasn't done a whole lot just yet. But so far, I think it still has potential. Now, let's take a look at Bitcoin. And again, we talked about the cryptocurrencies in last week's presentation. So just so none of this appears to be in hindsight by last week, I'm talking again last week at Bandcamp, go in and watch the week of charts from last week. But you can see nice little uptrend as evidenced by the lows greater than the moving average. And this is, by the way, this is a 30 exponential moving average. And again, we have the parameters just default to 40, but 40 is a really long trend. I like about 10 to get started with the market, just so I'm not waiting for 40 bars and then the trend's over by the time I get there. But you can see also the big blue arrow, again, pointing higher. Nice little pullback. Now, keep in mind, it's something like cryptocurrencies or Forex. I'm a little bit more lenient on some of these patterns, whereas in stocks, I'm looking for a little bit more perfection. But you can see pretty clean pullback here. Nice little intersection of the moving average. And notice down here that the Landry light has gone away. Why? Well, because the lows are now lower than the 30-day EMA. Also notice that the highs are not lower than the 30-day EMA, so you don't have red like you have back here. And by the way, one of the most important things you could do in addition to recognizing trend is to recognizing when there is no trend, or learn to recognize when there is no trend. So back here, what do we have? We have no Landry light. We have maybe 1 day here, and then all of a sudden we get some red. Is that a downtrend developing? Well, nope, we have no Landry light again. Not an uptrend because we don't have any green. We have red again here. Is that a downtrend? Well, not yet, because now we're back above the moving average, and then now we have green. So Tarzan speak, as I've been saying quite a bit, this bad, this good, okay? This bad, red and green, or none whatsoever. And then green, obviously, is good. So just something simple like that. It always amazes me how something so simple could actually work in real markets. And when I get myself into a lot of trouble is when I try to force things to happen and use things that are more complicated. If I just sit back and look at a market and say, okay, what do we have here? Ethereum, all right, it's got a little bit of Landry light. Oh, it's got downside Landry light, upside Landry light. It's just kind of bouncing around. If I draw a big blue arrow, it's going to be mostly sideways. Maybe I should sit on my hands a little bit and then wait for an opportunity to get in. And then you can see we have nice Landry light here, followed by the lows, of course, being greater than the moving average up top. Big blue arrow, in this particular case, points higher. And then we have a pullback to the exponential moving average. So notice down here, the Landry light up close to 30 or 40, above 30 and below 40. So for 40 days, it's been trending really, really nicely higher. And then now it pulls back to its moving average. And look at that. Look at the way it just took off. I feel like Tiny Elvis. Look at that trend. It's huge. But you can see, nice little pullback to the moving average. An entry, let's say above this high right here would probably be a good spot to enter. So somewhere probably around 4, let's just say 420 round numbers, and so far, so good on that one. By the way, I am long Bitcoin, I am long Ethereum, and I am long Link. I want to thank everybody for watching. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Again, if you need to reach me, davelandry.com/contact. I do answer all emails with the caveat eventually. What I'm trying to do lately is I'm trying to answer as many people as possible, and a lot of people might have the same question. So what I'll do is, again, in something like the weekend charts, which is on Thursdays, and lately it's been Thursday nights. Check my website on that, davelandry.com. I'll cover those there if you don't get an answer right away. And then, of course, if you want the slides and a link to a page with all the other materials and my 3 books, you can go to davelandry.com/stockcharts. So thanks, everybody, for watching, and may the trend be with you.
Hey, Grayson Rose here with Stockcharts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider giving it a like down below, maybe leave us a comment, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe at the link up above. We're gonna bring you daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial experts.